Hey guys, welcome to 2-Minute Terms Day. I'm Hannah, and in these videos I teach you some ceramics terms, and I hope that it only takes 2 minutes. Although, the more of these I've made, the more I feel like that it was wishful thinking. Today we're talking about the anatomy of pottery. And yeah, it's called anatomy. A lot of parts of pots are named after parts of a person. Foot, lip, belly. So I have some pots here with me, and I'm gonna try and show you what each part is. Now, I could just point at each part and name it, but that would be boring, and if that's what you want, you could just look up a diagram. So instead, I'm going to try and give you a little bit more insight into each part as we talk about it. Let's start with something that every pot has, a foot. The foot is just the bottom of the pot, the part that it stands on. But one thing that often happens is beginner potters forget to think about the foot at all. After all, it's on the bottom, who's going to see it? But you'll definitely be looking at it when it starts scratching up the surface you set it on. Trust me, my dining room table knows. One thing I wish I'd learned a lot earlier was to sand the foot of every pot, because even though you can smooth it perfectly while it's in greenware, sometimes the firing process will bring a rough texture back out of the clay. And so the bottom of your pot ends up feeling like sandpaper again. Sanding the bottom of your pot after it's glazeware is a great way to fix that problem. Now, if you're hand building, the bottom of your pot is probably just a flat, smooth plane. But if you're throwing on the wheel, you're probably going to trim a foot, which can also be called a foot ring. But you can also hand build a foot ring, like on this pot, or trim a foot to be flat, like this one. But the foot ring has a secret power. You see, large flat surfaces have a tendency to warp or bubble during firing, but a well-placed foot ring can prevent that. That's why foot rings are especially important on dishes like plates and platters that have especially big, flat areas. In fact, you may have even seen double or triple foot rings on larger plates or platters. But flat and foot ring are not your only options. You can get as creative as you want. Some potters will put multiple feet on their pots, but this can get tricky. If you use 3 feet, your pot's guaranteed to always stand without rocking. But once you get into 4 or more points of contact, you have more likelihood that your pot may end up rocking, wobbling if one of the legs is shorter than the other. But let's keep moving. Right on up to the lip. The lip is the uppermost portion of the walls and surrounds the opening into the pot. Technically speaking, every pot has a lip because technically pots are vessels, things like cups and vases. But if you also tend to lump in your sculptural work with your pots, yeah, some pots may not have a lip because they're sculptures, but they all have a foot. Now, we all know that the lip of a pot is important. It's on the top. We all see it. And so having a nice shaped lip is good for making a nice shaped pot. But the lip does more than that, especially if you're making functional ware like cups. Having a well-formed lip can be the difference between a good and a bad experience using a cup or a mug or even a bowl. I'm sure you can all think of a mug right now in your cabinet that is your favorite. It's just a pleasant experience. And probably a big factor in that is the shape of the lip. Or maybe you're thinking of a terrible mug, one where the lip is just not working the way that it should. That's why shaping your lip is so important on functional ware. But the lip has a secret feature as well. Whenever we look at an object, our brain can automatically estimate how much it weighs. That way, if we go to pick it up, we use the right amount of force. When a pot feels surprisingly heavy or light, it's because our estimate doesn't match the actual weight. And the lip plays a big role in that estimation. If the lip is thinner than the rest of the wall of the pot will feel heavy. But if the lip matches the thickness of the walls, it will feel the correct weight. And some potters use this trick to their advantage to make their pots feel light by making the lip slightly thicker than the rest of the walls of their pot. Now, like we said, the lip is the uppermost edge of the walls of the pot, and it surrounds the opening into the pot. And that opening is sometimes called the mouth. But it's kind of interesting because we only call it the mouth on pots where the opening is smaller than the rest of the pot or the same size as that opening. Once we get into a bowl where the opening is bigger than the rest of the pot, the word mouth doesn't really seem to apply anymore. And it definitely doesn't apply to a plate. But now let's move to the middle of the pot, the body. The body is just the middle of the pot, everything between the foot and the lip. And we have several more words to describe the shape of the body. But sometimes we talk about the wall of the pot, When we're talking about the wall, we're talking about technical things like how thick it is, usually comparing how thick one part is to another, or maybe talking about how it's joined together. So while the words wall and body are talking about the same parts of the pot, we use them to draw attention to different aspects of the pot. Wall is more about the technical aspects. It's about the building and the process, whereas body brings our attention to the overall shape. So let's describe those shapes. Belly and shoulder are two words that we use to describe a curve on a pot that goes out and back in. A belly is a softer curve, a more gentle slope, whereas a shoulder has a more extreme angle near the top and a softer curve on the bottom. A shoulder creates more of a ledge, kind of like your shoulders. A pot could have either a belly or a shoulder, or a combination of both, or neither. And with some pots, it may just be kind of hard to tell. I could probably describe this pot as having a shoulder because it does have more of this extreme ledge here, but because the curve underneath feels similar to the one on top, I think this feels more like a belly. This pot might be kind of hard to define as well, but I would call this a shoulder because there's not much of a curve back towards the foot. In fact, the foot and the shoulder are almost the same width. So I would call this a shoulder. But let's talk about the neck. The neck is the skinnier portion above the shoulders or the belly of a pot. So a pot has to have a belly or shoulders in order to have a neck. It has to have a wide part in order for there to be a narrower part. But just because a pot has a shoulder or belly doesn't mean it has to have a neck. It can just end at the lip. You can have a pot that doesn't have a neck if the entire pot is the same width all the way up, or if you have something that continues to open like a bowl. And the neck can be almost any shape, so long as it's thinner than the rest of the pot. It can be very short or very tall. It could be most of the height of the pot or almost none at all. And it can be very thin, or it can be wide enough to put flowers in. I've become Dr. Seuss. So I think that means we've reached the end of this video. We've covered all the words that sound like anatomy. Next video, I'll cover words like gallery and handle that don't sound like anatomy. Thank you to my husband for letting me use some of his pots. He likes to experiment with different necks more than I do, so that works out for us. If you'd like to see more of my pottery, it's on my website, arkansaspotter.com, and I'll put a link to my husband's website as well. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you learned something. I'll see you next time.